हेलो स्टूडेंट्स, आज मैं आप सभी लोगों को नेट एग्जाम पर्पस कुछ क्वेश्चंस पढ़ाऊंगा। शुरू करते हैं आज की क्लास। ब्रिटिश लिटरेचर रिलेटेड सम क्वेश्चंस। 1. Who wrote Paradise Lost? Answer: John Milton. 2. Who wrote The Fairy Queen? Answer: Edmund Spenser. 3. Who is the author of Dr. Faustus? Answer: Christopher Marlowe. 4. Who wrote Hamlet? Answer: William Shakespeare. 5. Who wrote Macbeth? Answer: William Shakespeare. 6. Who wrote King Lear? Answer: William Shakespeare. 7. Who wrote The Tempest? Answer: William Shakespeare. 8. Who wrote Robinson Crusoe? Answer: Daniel Defoe. 9. Who wrote Gulliver Travels? Answer: Jonathan Swift. 10. Who wrote Tom Jones? Answer: Henry Fielding. Romantic age related some important questions. 1. Who wrote lyrical ballads with Wordsworth? Answer: S.T. Coleridge. 2. Who wrote Kubla Khan? Answer: S.T. Coleridge. 3. Who wrote Ode to a Nightingale? Answer: John Keats. 4. Who wrote Ode on a Grecian Urn? Answer: John Keats. 5. Who wrote Prometheus Unbound? Answer: P.V. Shelley. 6. Who wrote John Donne? Answer: Lord Byron. 7. Who wrote Songs and Innocence? Answer: William Blake. 8. Who wrote The Prelude? Answer: William Wordsworth. 9. Who wrote Frankenstein? Answer: Mary Shelley. 10. Who wrote Emma? Answer: Jane Austen. Victorian age related some important questions. 1. Who wrote Jane Eyre? Answer: Charlotte Bronte. 2. Who wrote 2. Who wrote Wuthering Heights? Emily Bronte. 3. Who wrote Great Expectations? Answer: Charles Dickens. 4. Who wrote Tales of the D'Urbervilles? Answer: Thomas Hardy. 5. Who wrote In Memoriam? Answer: Alfred Tennyson. 6. Who wrote The Importance of Being Earnest? Answer: Oscar Wilde. 7. Who wrote Middlemarch? Answer: George Eliot. 8. Who wrote The Picture of Dorian Gray? Answer: Oscar Wilde. 9. Who wrote Culture and Anarchy? Answer: Matthew Arnold. 10. Who wrote The Mill on the Floss? Answer: George Eliot. Modern literature related some important questions. 1. Who wrote Ulysses? James Joyce. 2. Who wrote Mr. Dalloway? Answer: Virginia Woolf. 3. Who wrote The Wasteland? Answer: T.S. Eliot. 4. Who wrote Waiting for Godot? Answer: Samuel Beckett. 5. Who wrote A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man? Answer: James Joyce. 6. Who wrote 1984? Answer: George Orwell. 7. Who wrote Animal Farm? Answer: George Orwell. 8. Who wrote Lord of the Flies? Answer: William Golding. 9. Who wrote Sons and Lovers? Answer: D.H. Lawrence. 10. Who wrote Heart of Darkness? Joseph Conrad. Literary theory related some questions. 1. Who wrote Poetics? Answer: Aristotle. 2. Who wrote The Public? Plato. 3. Who coined the term deconstruction? Jacques Derrida. 4. Who developed the idea of Orientalism? Edward Said. 5. Who wrote The Second Sex? Simon de Beauvoir. 6. Who is associated with New Historicism? Stephen Greenblatt. 7. Who is the father of psychoanalysis? Sigmund Freud. 8. Who proposed the concept of archetypal criticism? Northrop Fryer. Who wrote Death of an Author? Ronald. 9. Who wrote Death of the Author? Roland Barthes. 10. Who coined the term difference? Jacques Derrida. Indian English literature related some important questions. 1. Who wrote Kanthapura? Raja Rao. 2. Who wrote The Guide? R.K. Narayan. 3. Who wrote Midnight Children? Salman Rushdie. 4. Who wrote The Shadowlands? Amitabh Ghosh. 5. Who wrote Train to Pakistan? Khushwant Singh. 6. Who wrote The White Tiger? Arvind Adiga. 7. Who wrote The God of Small Things? Arundhati Roy. 8. Who wrote Clear Light of Day? Anita Desai. 9. Who wrote Untouchable? Mulk Raj Anand. 10. Who wrote Kuli? Mulk Raj Anand. American literature related some important questions. 1. Who wrote The Scarlet Letter? Nathaniel Hawthorne. 2. Who wrote Moby Dick? Herman Melville. 3. Who wrote Leaves of Grass? Walt Whitman. 4. Who wrote The Great Gatsby? Scott Fitzgerald. 5. Who wrote The Old Man and the Sea? Ernest Hemingway. 6. Who wrote Beloved? Toni Morrison. 7. Who wrote The Glass Menagerie? 7. Who wrote The Glass Menagerie? Tennessee Williams. 8. Who wrote The Crucible? Arthur Miller. 9. Who wrote Adventures of Huckleberry Finn? Mark Twain. 10. Who wrote Invisible Man? Ralph Ellison. Language and linguistics related some important questions. Who is known as the father of modern linguistics? Ferdinand de Saussure. 2. Who wrote Excerpts of the Theory of Syntax? Noam Chomsky. 3. IPA stands for International Phonetics Alphabet. 3. IPA stands for International Phonetic Alphabet. 4. What is morphology? Study of word formation. 5. What is phonetics? Study of speech sounds. 6. What is semantics? Study of meaning. 7. What is syntax? Study of sentence structure. 8. What is pragmatics? Study of language and context. 9. Who proposed universal grammar? Noam Chomsky. 10. What is the smallest meaning unit of language? Morpheme. General literary terms. 1. What is a sonnet? A 14-line poem. 2. Who introduced blank verse into English? Henry Howard, Earl of Surrey. 3. What is an elegy? A poem of mourning. 4. What is an epic? A long narrative poem. 5. What is a ballad? A narrative song. 6. What is a soliloquy? A character speaking thoughts aloud. 7. What is dramatic irony? Audience knows more than the character. 8. What is a Bildungsroman? A coming-of-age novel. 9. What is satire? Writing that ridicules human faults. 10. What is allegory? A story with symbolic meaning. Miscellaneous related some important questions. 1. Who won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1913? Rabindranath Tagore. 2. Which was the first English dictionary? A Dictionary of the English Language by Samuel Johnson. 3. What is the oldest English epic? Beowulf. 4. Who wrote Pygmalion? George Bernard Shaw. 5. Who wrote the Canterbury Tales? Geoffrey Chaucer. 6. Who is known as the father of English poetry? Geoffrey Chaucer. 7. Who wrote The Rape of the Lock? Alexander Pope. 9 and 8. Who wrote The Duchess of Malfi? John Webster. 9. Who wrote Vulcan? Ben Jonson. 10. Who wrote the Spanish tragedy? Thomas Kyd. Today's questions ends here. Thank you.